Today we'll be walking through how to build agentic actions into your chatbot application. So if you followed along in our other videos, we were mainly talking about how to perform read operations to our RAG-enabled chatbot, right? We want our chatbot to be able to read information from integrations like Google Drive, like Slack, like Salesforce, to provide more context-rich responses. In this tutorial, we actually want to perform actions in those third-party platforms. We don't just want to read data from Slack, but we actually want to be able to send Slack messages or create Salesforce contacts. And that's what we'll be doing today. So I've logged into our application and I enabled Salesforce and Slack. Let's get started with just a simple hello world. You can see it first drafts the message to get confirmation from the user. I will give it confirmation. And this is done intentionally, right? Because when we're creating data, we don't want to send sensitive information or have unintended messages. So we always want to prompt the user to confirm it and give a preview of what's going to be done. So let's check our Slack. We can see that hello world was sent. Now let's try it with Salesforce. So I'll create a Salesforce contact. I'll just use my own name here. You can see there's some required fields, right? It needs my email and my title. And again, we'll have a draft. First name, last name, email, title. They all look right. So I will give it permission. And great, we get a confirmation that Jack Moo has been successfully created. So let's go into our Salesforce sandbox, and I'm going to refresh the page. And we can see, yep, I'm here with the correct title. So that's demonstrating our agentic actions in our chatbot. Now we can do something a little bit more interesting, right? Let's try to chain actions together where we take advantage of RAG-enabled querying with our agentic actions. So I might say send Slack message with this. So this is kind of funny, right? I created a contact called head of bagels in Salesforce. So what we first have to do is we have to use a query tool to query who the head of bagels is, and then use an agentic action to send a Slack message. So we see that it's drafted a Slack message. The head of bagels is Annie Bagel, and I'll just say yes. And I'll go back to our Salesforce, and you can see the first record, Annie Bagel, chief of bagels. So we get confirmation. Let's check our Slack, and we can see that our message appears. Head of bagels is Annie Bagel. Perfect. Last thing I'll do is I will show that we can also perform some more complicated actions. This one was already pretty complicated, but now I'll show an example of what if we wanted to summarize an article and send a message in Slack, right? So I will go to one of my articles and then just copy and paste something. So I'll just do this little excerpt. And I gave some parameters. I wanted a 2-sentence summary and send it to Slack. So I asked to see the draft, right? Yep, it is 2 sentences, and it summarizes the article pretty well. I'll say yes, let's send it. And again, let's check Slack. And its exact draft that our chatbot just created and drafted up for us. So that's the basic functionality of our agentic actions. Let's take a look at how these actions are actually taking place at a high level. The actions first start with the user prompting an action, like sending a Slack message or a user prompting the chatbot to create a Salesforce contact. Parato, our chatbot, has to decide on which action to take, whether it should draft, whether it should do this in Slack or Salesforce, and then create a preview and a draft of that action, right? After user confirms, only then does Parato actually trigger like a post request to Salesforce and Slack, the third-party integration, to propagate those changes in Slack and Salesforce. So first we send a post request to Paragon. Paragon is the middleware that will take care of authentication and webhook triggers and any other integration-specific details. The third party will send back a 200 status code or an error, and we will filter that back to our user. So that's the workflow at a high level. Let's take a look at the code implementation. So from a code implementation point of view, I'm just going to show some short snippets of what I think is the most important pieces. So the first one is the OpenAI agent. This is a Llama Index abstraction that wraps up an OpenAI LLM and allows this agent to be provided with tools. And these are tools we define, like draft Slack message, send Slack message, draft Salesforce, as well as the query engine tool. This is what we're using to query Salesforce and Slack and Google Drive and all the other integrations that we showed off in our previous tutorials. So in terms of new tools, I'll jump to the drafting tool, where it's really cool because we can define exact parameters of what this tool will use. So we need things like first name, like last name, like email and title. And from this description, this is how the chatbot is extracting those parameters and mapping them to the correct schema. So it's mapping email to email, title to title, right? And if you remember, when we didn't put in an email and title, it prompted us to input it after, and it's because we deem these fields as required. After we get our required fields, we can actually provide a custom TypeScript function, and this is what the tool will essentially call after it knows that this tool should be called and it's getting all the right parameters. So in the confirm and create Salesforce contact tool, we need all of these parameters, again, first name, last name, email, as well as a confirmation. After we get all those things, we can actually call a function, create Salesforce contact, that will send the post request. So if we go into it here, we can see we're sending a post request with that contact object as the request body, and we're giving some authentication like our Java Web Token. And this is what will be forwarded on to our Paragon middleware to essentially trigger the API that will go to Salesforce. One last thing I want to demonstrate is it's really important to be explicit with these descriptions. This is how we're essentially telling our chatbot to only use steps when other things occur, right? So we should only confirm and create Salesforce contact after a draft has been created. And you can be really explicit on when not to do things. Do not use this function if an affirmative confirmation is not given. Do not use this function if a draft hasn't been created yet. So you can be really explicit, and it's almost like translating English words into code. And this is something really cool about function tools and LLMs in general. So let's jump back into what happens after we send a post request. This post request gets intercepted, or it gets sent to Paragon, and we have a couple workflows we've defined, right? So in the example with the Slack message, we are sending some data in a request body, and we can actually take a look at the request body, the message. This is the one from the summary, and this is what's getting passed into our Paragon workflow. Paragon also has a couple really popular Slack API interactions already managed, so it's already a step, so we don't have to worry about the implementation details on what's the exact endpoint or what does the data look like to be able to send a message via the Slack API. We can just use the Slack step, and then we can see that we are getting a 200 response code, and we can pass that back to our application. One last workflow I want to show off is after we create a new contact, we also want to send that new contact information back to our chatbot to put into our vector database so we can use it for later querying, right, whenever we want those RAG-enabled actions. So we can see here, it's a webhook trigger where whenever a new record is created in Salesforce, and we can see that a new record was created for Jack Moo, right? They are developer advocate at Parato.ai. This data gets sent to our backend, so that way we always have real-time data, the most up-to-date data from Salesforce and all of our other integrations. So that is the tutorial. We showed off how to implement agentic actions, layering on with all the other RAG-enabled features and permissions that we showed off in our previous tutorials. If you have any questions on AI use cases and how integrations can come into play, please feel free to reach out to us and learn more about our product Paragon. And thank you guys for watching. Thanks.